Magandang araw po sa inyo lahat. Muli, I am Jeffrey Bunquin and I am the founder of Filipino Science Hub. So welcome to FilSciHub Research University's training course number 4. So we hope that this training course becomes your practical guide on how to develop an effective research proposal. So for today, I will be covering the essential elements of a research proposal, and I will also be infusing some tips and best practices on how you can strengthen your research proposal to win the favor of funding agencies and essentially win funding grant competitions. It is our pleasure to introduce our students to the process of research project development and more particularly research proposal writing. And we hope that this training course will also serve as a refresher material for our teachers and students who may have already had some prior experiences in writing up research proposals. Um, okay, so before we proceed with the discussion, I would like to give you an idea of my background. So ako po ay Pilipino from Batangas City, and I was born and raised in the Philippines. I was educated in the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, where I took a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry. And in 2009, I moved to Canada to take up my doctorate degree in chemistry. After graduating from my PhD program, I moved on to the States to venture into a research and development career over the industry and the government laboratory sectors. And so, I have had a total of about 14 years worth of experience when it comes to research and development. And over those 14 years, I have also been fortunate enough to get involved in a number of research proposal development. And so, what I'm actually doing for today is that I am not just giving you a regurgitation of textbook approaches to research proposal writing, but what I actually did was during the preparation of this training course, I went back and revisited like all those research proposals that I have written back in the days. I have dissected them down to their common framework, and it's actually that common design of research proposals that I will be sharing with you. So ito po ay practical guide based on my experiences. And as I have mentioned, I have worked for a number of different organizations that are venturing into research. And these essential elements are the exact same elements that make up research proposals that you're writing for an academic research project, for a government lab research project, and also for an industrial company's research and development proposal initiatives. So these are the questions that prompted us to put together this training course. So nung una po, whenever we go back home to the Philippines and we do outreach activities, essentially interacting with high school teachers and asking them what training materials they need to be able to initiate a research project more effectively, we're usually asked the question of how do we write a research proposal? And those questions are typically followed up by specific questions like, what are the parts of a research proposal? So, yan po, marami pong medyo nalilito po sa atin. Ano ba yung mga essential part? Kasi depending on which particular funding agency you're applying for support, they do have their own preferences in terms of the format of or the composition of a research proposal. So I'm hoping that after this training course, you will have an idea of the most essential components of a research proposal that you need to write for whatever funding agency you're submitting it to. And then the second specific question that we typically get is, in addition to identifying the different parts of a research proposal, what type of information or like what level of granularity or detail should you actually provide whenever you're writing a research proposal? So, gaano po yung bakalalim yung pagkakasulat ng research proposal? And when do you know that the level of detail is enough already to convince the funding agency? And so I'm hoping that in this course, we can give you an idea as to how much effort they exert in terms of your research of information to put into a research proposal, and then again at the same time, how to frame the language in such a way that you are really convincing that funding institution that you are the right person to work on this idea, and that your idea is the best there is, that deserves their resources. Okay, so to answer these questions, for this training course, there are three key takeaways that I would like for you to bring with you after this webinar. So the first of which is, we hope that you'd be um, more familiar with the different parts of a research proposal, each part's purpose, and the essential information that you should include in those specific components. Secondly, we'll provide tips and best practices in terms of like how you can make your research proposal as convincing as possible. And then for the benefit of our teachers and students, I will also be introducing to you the concepts of research, project planning, and management. And to make this experience more relatable, we will be providing like specific examples framed around the concept of developing a research project that involves the synthesis of gold nanoparticles for a specific application. And for the benefit of those who have actually not attended our previous seminar, this is the exact same case study that I use for our training course on the design of experiments. So gagawin po namin, thematic po ito. So lahat na po ng mga training courses namin, we will try to make use of one specific example just to make sure that you can visualize how a concept can be developed from ideation all the way up to data processing and science communication. But allow me to qualify po that this specific case study that we are providing here just for the purpose of exemplification, this is a hypothetical case study po. So don't take this example as though I'm giving you a specific topic to work on, because ito po ay for demonstration purposes lamang. Okay, so before we begin discussing the parts of our research proposal, the very first question that we have to be able to answer and be very familiar with would be the definition of a research proposal. So a research proposal is a request for support for sponsored research, instruction, or extension project. So this is a request. So again, a request has to be quite convincing. And what does this research, what does this request typically consist of? A research proposal should provide a background of the proposed work. So, what information convinced you to work on this area? What's the conventional wisdom within the proposed area of study? A research proposal also puts into detail the proposed idea. So, from a very broad research topic, what specific scope are you trying to cover? So dito na po papasok, what are the specific research questions that you're trying to answer, and then the scope of the work, which is very important. A well-written research proposal should have a fairly well-defined scope. So yan po, we will discuss that in greater detail later on. A research proposal should also provide a work plan. So in order for you to work or to answer those research questions, you have to put into detail, how will you get there? What specific activities do you need to do? What type of experiments do you need to carry out to get to the answers? And when I said answers, a research proposal also provides a list of anticipated milestones. So ano po ba yung mga resulta? Ano po ba yung mga sagot sa tanong na ina-anticipate na makuha ninyo? And how will that help establish the concept or the ideas that you're trying to develop, from your research activities? And most importantly, a research proposal provides a list of impacts. So, what's the importance of working on your proposed research idea? Who will benefit from it? What will be the effects of it, like to the society, to the area of study? So these are some of the questions and information that you have to be able to put into a proposal. Okay. So how would these information fit within a written proposal? So ano na ba yung mga most common elements of a research proposal? And these are The first five concepts that I will be discussing in greater detail in the succeeding slide. So the first of which, a proposal should have a title and a list of proponents. A proposal should have a summary or an abstract. There's the body of the proposal, which is composed of a bunch of different subsections, and later po natin yan i-discuss. The proposal should have a section dedicated for the anticipated value of the research. So, bakit ba mahalaga yung research program or project that you are trying to propose or to solicit support for? And then lastly, very importantly, we need to provide a set of references. So saan ba natin nakuha yung information that we included in the proposal? That is very important too. And then after we've discussed like all the most essential elements of a research proposal, as I have mentioned before, I will be introducing to you the topics of um, uh, expertise and research management relating to a research program. How you can more effectively communicate, how a research program can contribute to the training and development of everyone involved, so like students and collaborators. And then lastly, I will also briefly touch on the importance of uh, covering intellectual property in as early as the proposal development stage. Okay, so the first part of a research proposal is the proposal title. So, or you should be able to compose a proposal title effectively, because this is the very first component of the research proposal that the research funding agencies or the reviewers will read. So kapag medyo mababa po yung quality ng inyong title, they might just lose interest to, read further into your proposal, or they might end up becoming, or they might end up becoming negatively biased towards the idea because medyo laglag na yung simula. And so what are the qualities of an effective proposal title? So it should very well represent the proposed idea. It should be catchy and it should be concise. So kailangan hindi po to kayo hihingalin sa pagbabasa ng title kasi sobrang haba niya. So this is an example of a concise and catchy title that you can use for a research proposal. So yung idea po natin is that we are developing size-controlled and size-uniform nanoparticles in a cost-efficient manner in order to produce materials that can be used as anti-cancer agents. So how can you write up what would make for a catchy or interesting proposal title? So this is something that I can provide as an example. Say cost-effective synthesis of size-uniform gold nanoparticles for anti-cancer application. So kung hihimay-himayin nyo, if you're gonna look at the anatomy of this title, so you have the catchphrases cost effective. So that's attention catching because that means that you're trying to improve the cost of this material. You have the catchphrase size uniform gold particle. So size uniformity, it is a very important property of gold nanoparticles. So instead of having random sizes, you're trying to find ways to just make one particular size of a material. And then lastly, for anti-cancer application. So you have the proposed ideas, the proposed quality of the materials in terms of cost and size, and then the purpose for which you're making them. So you're making them to make anti-cancer drugs. So yun po. So with just how many words are there here, about 10 or less, you will have already captured the main concept, or like the topic that you are proposing for this project. And then, so along with the proposal title, typically we list down the names of the proponents. So who are the authors, or who came up with the idea? And it is very important that um, we list them down. Make it a practice that we identify everyone who contributed to the idea and to the proposal development, because that helps in building camaraderie and rapport within the group, and that also builds a sense of community. So isama your teachers, students, collaborators, so whoever contributed ideas, ilagay niyo po dyan. And then along with the name of the authors, especially if you're working collaboratively with people from different institutions, you also list down like their affiliation. So anong school sila, anong company sila, anong research institutions they're part with. So it is very important that you give credit to everyone who contributed to the idea. Okay, so the second part of a research proposal is what we call the summary or the abstract. So an abstract or a summary gives you an overview of the research proposal. And based on my experience of writing research proposal, like typically there are three main concepts that you're trying to establish or that you're trying to provide in an abstract. So the first of which is a background. So uh, what problem needs to be solved? Like what is the broad area that covers your area of study? And then also like on this in this part, you also talk about what has been done before. So it's very important that you do your literature search quite effectively for you to be able to provide the background. The second part of this is typically the problem. It's the problem statement. So what specific research questions are you proposing to answer? Because we begin the overview with a fairly broad concept, but you also have to be able to naturally transition into the specific questions. Ano po ba yung gusto nyo talagang i-establish? Kasi you cannot claim something over a very broad um, topic. And then the last part of this is the proposed study. So you have to concisely uh, express your objectives for the program, and also you should also concisely speak about the scope of the project. And typically per section po we dedicate 2 to 3 sentences. So effectively for an abstract, you should actually not go beyond 10 sentences. And just to give you an idea, why do we actually want for this to be concise and less than 10 sentences? It's actually mainly because the abstract is you will initially communicate to um, your funding agencies or to any reviewer who would ask you questions. So for example, hypothetically speaking, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of an elevator pitch. Say pumasok kayo ng building and you enter an elevator and you chanced upon one of your funding agencies, and they ask you, okay, what are you really proposing to do? So an elevator pitch should be an overview of your idea. It should capture the essence of your idea, and you should be able to communicate that within 30 to 60 seconds, because yung elevator rides po typically they last for 30 to 60 seconds, like on average. And so by limiting your sentences to about like less than 10, you can quite efficiently communicate the essence of your idea um, in less than a minute. So it's gonna be much easier to digest, like some of these tips if we have examples. And so again, this is a specific example framed around the gold nanoparticle synthesis idea that we introduced earlier during the study, that we're trying to make um, cheap and size uniform gold nanoparticles for anti-cancer treatment. And so again, these are just examples. Wag po ninyo itong i-digest as these are things that we are proposing that you do. This is just for the purposes of exemplification. So in terms of the background, you can write up a couple of sentences that speaks about why cancer, like that, like the importance of cancer research and that it's a leading cause of deaths globally, and then follow that statement with the importance of developing anti-cancer drugs. So that provides a background, like what area are you trying to work on, and then you transition into the statements that will help you um, communicate your hypothesis. So the first of which would be metal nanoparticles have actually been studied as anti-cancer agents. However, they're quite expensive. So you have already established like a hypothesis and a challenge, and then follow that up with a statement like that says something to the effect of studies suggest that size uniform nanoparticles are more effective anti-cancer agents. So with those two sentences, you will have already communicated your problem statement, what specific questions you're trying to answer. And then the third part of it is again the proposed study or general objective. So like again in this section you talk about the main objective of the project. So you say a research project on the development of cheap and size uniform gold nanoparticles is proposed. And um, the impact of it. You should also communicate the impact of it. So this program can make high efficacy anti-cancer drugs more accessible. So yun po, with just 6 sentences, you have communicated the background, the problem statement, the objective, and also the relevance or the impact of the study. Okay, so after the overview, the third part of the proposal is its body. So the body of the proposal is composed of at least like 3 different sections. So the first of which would be the rationale and background to the proposed idea. The second part is what we call the justification, which essentially covers the hypothesis that you have formulated and the basis for that hypothesis. And then the third part, which is also which I consider to be like one of the most important parts of the proposal, is the proposed research work. So within this section, you're gonna have to define some general considerations for the proposed work, um, scope and limitation. What you're intending to do, say over a span of a year or two of working on this project. And then the third part would be research methods. You have a vision. What would be the path? How will you actually get there? Okay, so the first part of the body of a proposal is the rationale or the background for the proposed project. So in most proposals that I have written and that I have read and reviewed myself, typically um, experts dedicate like a page for this, so you can have like about at least 3 paragraphs. And so typically the first paragraph, or they begin the rationale and the background for the study by speaking more broadly about like the proposed idea, because like in the overview earlier, you only had like 2 sentences for this. So you can dedicate a paragraph that answers the questions, what the proposed research is about. um, are there literature or prior reports or studies that um, can help define your problem, or describe the problem. And then you typically end this paragraph with with answers to the question, why are you proposing this idea and what is its relevance? Are you doing something to benefit the world? You have to be able to speak to those importance, in this section. So this is going to be your platform. You're establishing the need for your project. You're not just doing this because you're curious. You're doing, or you're proposing a certain research idea because there is a need. It is of high importance. Okay, so the second part of the rationale or the background is the literature uh, information. So dito na po papasok yung review of literature, and our second training course for FilSciHub Research University very well focuses on how to effectively review the literature. So I suggest that you actually check that out. That was delivered by Janice Averilla, who's a scientist based in Kansas, here in the US. So what type of information should you, so what are the types of information that you should take from the literature and include as part of the rationale? So based on experience, typically people provide insights into the progress within the area of research. So what has been done quite recently that's considered state of the art, and by yung best results recently, that can help justify your interest in the area of study. And then in certain cases, like it's fairly easy to find recent developments that you can use as motivation for an idea. But if you end up working or proposing an idea that has never been explored before, this is also the section where you highlight the novelty of what you're doing. So you just say, okay, this has never been done before, but by conjecture, and by comparing this idea with what's been established in other fairly related but non-overlapping studies, this is how we are framing the hypothesis. So, you can really use the review of literature to highlight the importance based on related studies, or you can also cite literature to highlight the novelty. why what you're doing is really new and it's never been explored or done before. So again, this will very well reflect the quality of your review of literature. Okay. And then the last part of the rational or the background is the hypothesis or the objective. So this is the part where you talk about your hypothesis. So essentially, your hypothesis is going to be the basis of your research objectives. And so if you notice, I have actually organized these elements to the rational and background using an inverted triangle. So this is to show that the thought process that is practiced into writing up a rational is via deductive reasoning. So you start with a very broad question, and then you are refining, or you're actually coming up with a more focused set of research questions all the way down to the hypothesis using your research of the literature. So ito po yung tinatawag typically ng mga tao sa atin na conceptual framework. So saan ba nanggaling yung inyong hypothesis? Saan ba nanggaling yung inyong research question? So this is actually the part. So the rationale and the background provides that explanation, of your interest to a particular topic, and what specific questions and hypotheses you're trying to verify. Again, an example based on the nanoparticle idea. So again, you begin with restating the proposed work. So you say, the synthesis of cheap and size uniform gold nanoparticles is proposed, and ultimately, the goal of it is to address challenges in the development of economic and efficient anti-cancer drugs. So that's one sentence you can further expound on. So like we said, typically we dedicate a paragraph for the first part of the rationale, and then secondly, the second part is related literature. So you start citing statements or findings from different studies that says, oh, several studies indicate that size uniform transition metals are more effective anti-cancer drugs. So uh, that's findings from other research that helps you justify your interest in size uniform gold nanoparticles. And then you can also include say pieces of literature that justifies why you think you can make those nanoparticles cheap. So you can say recent advances in nanoparticle synthesis methodology suggest that cheaper precursors and milder conditions can be employed, and this is very critical for reducing the cost. So like again, you on purpose you are citing studies or statements and reports that help uh, communicate your research questions. And then lastly, your hypothesis, you have to state it here. So size uniform gold nanoparticles can be more effective anti-cancer drugs. And then the second statement could be, oh, the use of cheap organic templates and milder conditions can significantly reduce the cost of gold nanoparticles. And then these hypotheses are again the basis of your research objectives, what you really are intending to do, what you intend to work on in the laboratory, what you intend to acquire data as proofs for. So, yun po. So these are just examples. Again, 3 paragraphs is typically enough for the rationale. Obviously, I have only shown like a couple of sentences just to give you an idea of the types of information or the types of messages that we have to send across whenever we're writing up a rationale or a background for the proposed research project. Okay, so the second part of the body of a proposal is the justification of your hypothesis and or research objective. So typically we dedicate one justification section for every hypothesis or objective that you have formulated for within the proposal. So again, one section per hypothesis and per objective. Typically, yung typical na length that I have seen for this section, it ranges from 4 to 6 paragraphs, and there are 3 main components. The first of which is a restatement of a more elaborate restatement of the hypothesis and the research objective. And that is typically followed by a citation of relevant literature information. So like I said, when it comes to framing these ideas and specific objectives and hypotheses, the way you write up the justification is really an indication of how of the quality of your review of literature. That's the reason why this is very important, that you do your background research quite effectively, justify your objective, and communicate the need, like why what you're doing is important. Okay, so the typical pieces of related literature that we typically provide here would be, a restatement of conventional wisdom in the area. And then you follow it up, by highlighting the gaps in the field of study. So what are the challenges, or what are the unanswered questions that you're trying to answer with your proposed research idea? So it's very important that you do that. And then lastly, you actually state, the studies, or the studies or pieces of information from the literature that served as the basis for your hypothesis. So this is the context. Saan ba nanggaling yung research question nyo? What triggered for you to be interested, to answer those questions? And then typically, we end a justification section with the importance of the proposed study. So again, this is more elaborate po, because the importance of answering that hypothesis, the importance of achieving the goals of achieving like this specific objective. Is this relevant to a particular area? Who will be benefiting from it? Would that be cancer-stricken individuals? Would it be specific to certain areas that need access to cheaper medicine? So you have to exemplify, or you actually you have to be able to enumerate um, um, these importance, or like the impacts of answering or validating like this specific hypothesis. So again, and there's a range of different importance that you can highlight. You can even include that, by doing this, you will be able to establish a much better understanding as to how nanoparticles are working. So you're also contributing to the fundamental understanding of the science behind, say, nanomaterials as cancer treatment. So that's very important. So again, medyo kung mapapansin po ninyo, medyo mahirap kasi ito talagang i-digest. Again, pupunta po tayo sa specific example. So like I said, you write up a justification specific to an objective. So there are two main objectives earlier that I identified. The first of which is on the development of size uniform gold nanoparticles as potential high efficacy anti-cancer drug treatment. So the focus of this objective or hypothesis is, um, to prove that size uniform gold nanoparticles will work as as anti-cancer treatment drugs. So upon restating that, you further reinforce the importance of answering this question by citing conventional knowledge. Ano na bang na-establish when it comes to nanoparticles as anti-cancer drugs? And then you mentioned studies, and information available from the open literature. Are there findings for that suggest that a relationship between nanoparticle size and anti-cancer activity is important for cancer treatment? So like you are trying to again provide them with pieces of information that motivated you to propose that, okay, size uniformity is a very important aspect of nanomaterial drug development. And then you have to highlight, and what are the challenges around the synthesis of size uniform nanoparticles. So by highlighting the challenges, it's going to become clearer to the reviewers, or to the funding agency, that, oh, yung pinopropose niya is addressing a very important challenge when it comes to the synthesis of size uniform nanoparticles. And if they can develop size uniform particles, then we might be able to come up with an anti-cancer drug. And again, that is already transitioning into the importance of the proposed study. Again, correlation, size uniformity, higher efficacy. So this is how you write up a justification. Like, quite unfortunately, it's going to be very difficult for me to write up an entire page with 4 to 6 paragraphs to show you guys as examples. But this is the framework. This is the framework of a justification section for a specific hypothesis or program objective. And then again, yung second example po, yung second objective ng gold nanoparticle case study natin is, in addition to making size uniform nanoparticles, we have to be able to produce them at a cost-effective manner. So when I say cost-effective, we have to make these materials cheap. So again, we start the justification by elaborating on the hypothesis or the objective. So we say the proposed study will adapt new synthetic methods and chemical precursors to produce cheap and uniform nanoparticles. And you follow it up by stating what's the conventional wisdom when it comes to the synthesis of nanoparticles. Is it usually expensive? How many studies are there, or how many protocols are there that produce nanoparticles quite cheaply? So you have to be able to provide those information. And then you should also mention or cite studies that suggest that cheaper synthetic routes can be adapted. So it could be a cheap synthetic route for making, say, um, silver nanoparticles. And if you're quite sure that you can adapt the silver chemistry for making gold nanoparticles, you should cite those. Again, highlight the challenges. What makes it difficult to make size-controlled gold nanoparticles? So by highlighting those challenges, you're establishing the fact that ito yung problema. This is a problem that needs to be solved. And we think that by copying the method that was adapted for silver, you're coming up with a solution. And then again, once you have verified your hypothesis, then it's very easy then to justify the importance. So again, the importance of cheap anti-cancer drugs is that you can make it more accessible to everyone. They don't have to raise a huge sum of money to avail of treatments. If you design the framework of your justification in this manner, you can tell the story in a fairly cohesive manner. So yun po. So justification is more like you're just telling them the story of how you came up with the idea and what made you confident that this is a good idea. So whenever you're writing a justification for a proposed or research idea or hypothesis, what could set your proposal apart would be if you could highlight some proof of concept work that proves in part that this idea is actually working, that this um, hypothesis is actually more likely verifiable. So if you're a high school teacher and over the years you, say for example, have been having your students to study the water quality within a specific area, you can use the results from previous years as a justification to any follow-up study for that topic. So yun po, kapag meron kayong preliminary data that supports your idea, you should highlight that in the justification section, because in addition to the review of literature, if you can provide them with actual experimental data that you gathered yourself, that typically helps increase the confidence in what you are proposing, because you're not only highlighting the studies or findings of other people, you have generated um, data to a certain extent to prove the point that you are proposing a very good idea that is worth funding and supporting. So, okay, so moving on. So the third part of the body of the proposal is the proposed research work. So this puts into detail, the first of which would be the general considerations of the proposed study. So when you say general considerations, what are the most critical elements or factors that you're trying to study to verify your hypothesis? The second part of this would be the scope and limitation. So it is very important whenever you're proposing a research program that you define the activities that you will be doing and the questions that you are trying to answer with your experiments, and at the same time also define aspects of the study that you will not be able to cover. And the third part of the proposed research work would be the research methods. So for example, if you're proposing that you're gonna prove a scientific phenomenon, then what are the experiments that you need to do to prove that? What types of activities do you need to carry out to be able to establish an answer? These are the things that you have to be able to uh, put into the proposed research work. And this is typically the longest part of the proposal, and I won't be able to give you, say, a 10-page example of proposed research work, but I would just like to go over what we can consider to be the conceptual framework. Okay, so for the case study that we've been working on, so what would be your general considerations? So general considerations, as I've mentioned earlier, would be the most critical elements of the study. So, like what specific factors do you need to be able to understand to be able to put together a meaningful body of knowledge? So the first of which was nanoparticle size. So as I mentioned before in the examples, the hypothesis is that size controlled or size uniform nanoparticles would make for higher efficacy anti-cancer drugs. The second objective would be that there are strategies that can be adapted for the synthesis of nanoparticles to make them cheap and affordable for people. So and then the third critical general consideration here would be the anti-cancer property. So, and this is most relevant to the first objective, which is size uniformity. Is size uniformity really a requirement for higher anti-cancer for enhanced anti-cancer property? So again, those are your general considerations that you need to highlight in the proposed scope of in the proposed research work scope of the study. This is very important because this helps you define a more focused set of objectives for your proposed work. So, for example, um, in terms of nanoparticle size, you could actually propose that, okay, so for this study, we will only be synthesizing nanoparticles within the range of sizes from 1 to 100 nanometers. So by clearly defining this range of size targets, it goes without saying that, oh, obviously anything higher than 100 nanometers will not be covered in the study, and anything smaller than 1 nanometer is also not going to be included in the study. So that helps set the expectations, for your research activities. Now, another important aspect is that it's one thing to control the size, for example. So however, small nanoparticles between 1 to 100 nanometers can come in different shapes. So are you particular about shape? So you can actually say that, oh yeah, this particular approach will make cubic nanoparticles. So you have to say that. But if you don't say that, that very well sets you up for higher expectations, and that are there will be like some lingering questions, like for your review, for your funding agencies, such that are they targeting cubic nanoparticles, are they targeting hexagonal nanoparticles? So if you don't define these things, your proposal is subject to a bunch of misinterpretations. So again, clearly defining the scopes and limitation of the study is very important. It speaks highly of the quality of your ideation process and how you did your background research works. Again, this is very important. The second general consideration that you need to define the scope of would be in terms of the total cost. So you actually mentioned earlier, like in the justification, that strategies to reduce nanoparticle synthesis costs would be could be achieved um, from using new organic templating agents, new solvents, and reagents, and even potentially milder reaction conditions. So you have to be able to define, okay, what are the factors that you are controlling, or what are the design elements that you will be implementing in the synthesis method for you to achieve cheaper nanoparticles. So again, you cannot just like broadly say that we will develop strategies to reduce the cost, because paano po i-estimate ng inyong funding agency kung gaano kadaming resources ang kailangan nyo kung wala po silang idea ano bang chemicals yung kailangan nilang gamitin? Kailangan ba nilang bumili ng mamahaling instrument? So these are some of the things that will help the funding agency have a better understanding whether your proposed idea is practical and achievable. So again, it's very important. So the third aspect or the third general consideration here is that you're trying to prove, say for example, anti-cancer property. So the question of, are you going to be doing in vivo studies? Are you going to be using animal subjects for this, or are you just going to be using bioassays that are less complicated? So you have to be able to define that. And like I said, a well written proposal has a clearly defined set of scopes and limitations. Again, if you're just coming up with very broad statements that are rather hand wavy in nature, um, mas mahirap po yung mapondohan. So again, dito sa box that I'm showing on the slide, the importance of scope and limitation, it is important for you to define what your research project will and will not cover. And your scope and limitation should be compatible with the resources and expertise that are available. So yun po, like I said, if you only have 1 year to work on this, you're not going to propose a scope of work that would take you 4 years to finish. Again, dito po makikita yung, like this will indicate how mature your ideation exercise is. If you can, again, specify a practical set of work within a given period of time, and considering the resources that you have in terms of money, in terms of equipment, if you do it, if the scope matches the resources, that typically is a sign of a mature researcher, and funding agencies will trust those people all the more, because ang message po is that, oh, they know what they're doing, so we should give them the money. Why would we give it to someone who cannot really clearly define what they want to do? Research methods is the third component of your proposed research work. So you're saying that, oh, I'm gonna prove this, I'm gonna prove that I can make size controlled nanoparticles, but then the question is, how do you prove that? After you have implemented your synthetic methods that's expected to generate size controlled nanoparticles, the question of, how are you going to prove it? What methods are you going to be using to measure nanoparticle size? What methods are you going to be able, so what methods will you be using to prove size uniformity? So these are things that you should also be able to put into detail. So are you going to be using microscopy to do this? Are you going to be doing X-ray techniques or X-ray spectroscopy to measure the size, and to have a feel of, or to gauge size uniformity? Those specific methods will need to be mentioned in the research proposal. Again, to clearly show your funding agency that you know what you are doing. When it comes to nanoparticle costs, what are the specific synthetic techniques that you have in mind? You don't have to specify just one, perhaps like a subset of techniques that you think you can adapt that will reduce the cost. And then again, these are based on prior knowledge and prior established information. So again, the more specific you are when it comes to the approach, the more confident your funding agencies will be. The third would be something related to the anti-cancer property. What are those specific research methods? So again, you have to specify. Again, scope of work, clearly defined research methods. It's gonna help you justify, like the level of funding that you're requesting for. Do you need 50,000 pesos? Do you need 1 million pesos? Do you need 10 million pesos to be able to do this job? Your funding agency won't be able to award you with a sufficient level of support if they don't have an idea of the methods and the resources that you need to be able to implement or to execute the study. So once you have established a strategy in terms of how you're gonna achieve the results, through your research methods, it is now then very important for you to highlight in your proposal the impact or the importance of the study. So this typically is a section in itself. So it typically is titled, like anticipated value of the research, or like the benefits, or the impacts of the study. And so there's a wide range of importance that you can highlight. So, for example, you can answer the questions: Are you solving a local, national, or a global issue? Are there economic benefits from your proposed research project if you are successful? So, there's a bunch of resources, like, from which you can get these information. So you can look at industry reports, government and market research, or studies. Whenever you are stating some of these benefits, it is most important that these are also still based on um, established information. So you just don't say that, oh, this is gonna solve the world's problem. But then if they ask you, then why and how, you should be able to answer them, and you should also be able to um, refer to reputable studies and knowledge. So again, medyo ito po ay characteristic tendency of most of us, especially those who are not really that experienced in terms of writing research proposals. So we tend to claim big things. We tend to use big words, but then the question is, can you back it up with information, with verifiable information? So, if the answer is no, then, you have to be able to substantiate like all those claims. It's very important. Another set of potential impacts of a particular study would be, are you improving consensus knowledge when it comes to that field? Are you redefining, or are you changing up the understanding of a particular subject matter? So these are some of the things that you should also highlight. It doesn't necessarily have to be of an economic impact. It could just be that you're contributing to fundamental science knowledge, and you should be able to um, highlight that as well. So and how do you again substantiate um, these such impacts? You can refer to patents, you can refer to scientific reports, you can refer to technical reviews that would put into context like why your result is really of importance. So it is very important again that you have uh, that you're establishing like these claims, with verifiable background information. Again, claims should be information based. It's you don't say typically this is just like 2 or 3 paragraphs, depending on how depending on the number of importance of your project. I mean, there's really no such restriction. The last section of the research proposal would be the references section. So as I have mentioned earlier, a research proposal is a combination of ideas, of related studies that other people may have established. And then it could also, parts of your ideation or of your approach could come from discussions with experts, with collaborators. So it is very important that we give reference to those sources of information. So cite books, cite scientific reports, cite scientific conference presentations, and even one-on-one discussions with experts. Say if you talk to another teacher and that teacher suggests a very important part of the idea, you should cite them. You should give them credit. Again, hindi po bababa ang kalidad natin bilang mga mananaliksik or researchers if we pay tribute, or if we give credit to people who who establish these information before us. So sabi nga nila, we stand on the shoulder of giants. So it's by referencing them, we are acknowledging the importance of their work. Okay, so far we have already covered, the definition of a research proposal. We have gone over the 5 most common parts of a research proposal. So title and proponents, summary, body of the proposal, anticipated value of research or the significance of the study, and then references. So at this point, we're gonna switch gears, and I will be introducing you to topics relevant to research project management. So, and what are these sections? So specifically for the remaining slides, I will talk about expertise in research management. I will talk about contributions to training and development. That a research proposal, that a research project can deliver. And then lastly, very briefly, we will touch on intellectual property. Okay, So research planning and management. So when you're writing up research proposals, most funding agencies will not only require for you to talk about the technical aspects of the work, the scientific um, and technology aspects of your proposal. But since you're proposing for the topic, or you're asking for support for the project, you're asking for funding for the project, it is very important that you also have a very good understanding, or you're quite skilled at breaking down the budget requirements of the project. So um, typically sa mga funding calls po, they would ask for you to come up with a breakdown of costs, or expenses. So those expenditures can cover supplies and equipment. They can cover testing and service fees. Say if you're going to be working with um, s- uh, analytical laboratories to do your characterization. So you have to be able to have an idea of like how much those costs would be. So again, monetary resources is one thing, but then time is also a very important resource that you have to keep in mind. So they will also ask for you to define a timeline for your project. So, the timeline typically provides a breakdown of activities that are involved to originate or to start and finish a project. And then most of these funding agencies will require for you to come up with a schedule of milestones. So, if you have three main objectives, how much time would be allocated to achieve, say, like the first objective of the project. So you have to put that into details. Again, it's not only the monetary resources that you are trying to actually put into detail in the research proposal, but you are also making sure that your funding agency has a good understanding as to when these milestones, or the results are to be delivered, and that will also give them a sense, is this really a practical plan? Can they really cover the work? Kaya ba nilang tapusin to in just like how long? Like 9 months? If the subject matter experts in your funding agency think otherwise, na hindi posibleng magawa nila to, more likely they will not give you the funding. But um, again, if your work scope, the budget you're requesting, and then the timeline that you're proposing are actually within practicality, more likely they will give you the support that you're asking for. Okay, so down to our last two slides. So these are additional sections that some funding agencies request for proposals to include in the package. So the first of which is expertise and research management. So and this is more relevant to college level research, mainly because funding agencies typically would prefer to give the funding to groups working on research programs who have the necessary set of expertise to achieve the goal. They have to be able to identify, or to emphasize that in the proposal, that we do have the right set of expertise to achieve the goal. It is also very important, like in this section, for you to um, establish who will be managing all the research activities and resources. So, that's typically the research lead. So, you also have to identify which um, um, specific parts of the project are to be conducted by um, certain members. So are there going to be students participating in this program? Are there going to be seasoned researchers? Are there going to be some collaborators? So all of those you actually specify in this section. Okay, and then typically after this is a discussion of the contribution of of this research project and all its activities to the development of certain personnel. So say for example at the high school level, um, those who would benefit much from the research activity will more likely be the students. So the question of um, will this research project and all its activities um, impart knowledge to the students in specific areas. So it's very important that you highlight them. Secondly, well the activities or the experiments prove their problem solving skills. So you also have to be able to verbalize that in the proposal. And then, well, the conduct of this research developed an inclination for them to later on pursue careers in this specific area of study. So again, it's not only about the technical deliverables, it's not only about budget and timeline, but mentorship. Mentorship is a very important aspect as well, that in most cases are required to be highlighted whenever you are writing up research proposals. Okay. And then the last additional um, project management component that you guys have to consider when you are writing research proposal would be intellectual property. So during the course of ideation and when you're putting together and when you're writing up your research proposal, you will have um, covered a lot of relevant literature, and then along with understanding the consensus knowledge in that field, you will have identified certain gaps where you know um, intellectual property opportunities could arise. So if you see the need to say develop size controlled nanoparticles at 5 nanometers, and you're quite sure that oh, this could be the solution that's needed to come up with one of the most potent anti-cancer treatments, then such ideas and potential discoveries will comprise, they comprise an intellectual property. So even as early as in the ideation stage, you should be able to identify which amongst the milestones could be patented, which within the milestones you can license like with the company to to earn a profit. Hindi lang yung pag-iisip po ng invention, hindi lang po siya dapat after the fact or after the experiment. If you're actually quite confident with the quality of your idea, if you're confident with its originality, in as early as in the proposal, in the ideation and proposal stage, you should also be at least mindful that okay, these are the opportunities that are going to come up, and that should also um, set the tone for how you're going to be highlighting the ideas. And in most funding research funding applications, they ask they typically have a clause as to who will be owning the intellectual property after the project has actually been done. So you have to be very mindful. If they fund your idea, will they own the patent? And would you be fine with it? So these are things that you have to be able to consider. So again, hindi lang po basta kayo lagay ng idea dyan. You have to anticipate, like values of the values of the ideas that you are putting together and of the research work that you are proposing. Okay, so I guess that's mostly it for this talk. So I'm hoping that after this discussion, you will have already at least learned like what a research proposal is all about, what its essential elements are. I'm hoping that like some of the tips and best practices that I mentioned earlier did stick, and you can apply them to come up with more compelling and convincing research proposals. And um, yeah, and I'm also hoping that like our introduction to you to the concepts of project management, I'm hoping that like your ideation and research planning exercise will become an enjoyable one. And like by being aware of all these aspects of research ideation, of research proposal and planning and management, this is not going to become like a fairly daunting and stressful activity. And I'm hoping that by having a good understanding of all these elements, the entire process of research will become a fulfilling and a fun activity between you and your teachers, between like between everyone involved. Okay, so a couple of very important takeaways that for you would be that whenever you're justifying something, an idea, an approach, a research method, it has to be based on verifiable information. And then secondly, a clearly defined research scope and limitation is very important in terms of showing how mature and skilled you are when it comes to the ideation process, and also at the same time it gives your funding agency the confidence in giving you the right amount of resources and support. Okay, so having covered all these, so JP Onya will be talking about strategies on how you can present your ideas effectively in the form of a pitch, and then Marty Mateo, for the third part of this study, will give you an idea of funding agencies that are existing in the Philippines, through which you might be able to get funding. So yun, maraming salamat po. And towards the end, I will be entertaining some questions. Mabuhay po kayo.